Hi, welcome everybody. Good morning. It's very exciting to be here with everyone. And we'll get ready to start. So my name is Jenny Person. I'm with Live Arts Miami, and I'm here with a bunch of very special guests. I'm here with Miwa Maitreya, who is an artist from Los Angeles, so it's very early for her. And she's there now. And she's on the screen as well, and she'll be talking with us about her work and all kinds of questions that we all have. I'd also like to introduce Julieta Rodrigo from the Clio Institute. Julieta is the Gen Clio program manager, youth program manager. We also have JP Mejia, and he is co-host of the co-host of the House on Fire podcast, and will be starting as a freshman at American University next year in the fall, a year from now, or not quite a year from now. And Nick Arce, who is a Miami-Dade College student and president of his campus's Yes Club, which is the environmental group on that campus. And we also have Alex Ender from Dreaming Green, which is the group that brought us together here and that you're all involved with as well. And she'll speak a little bit more about that at the end. So we're going to start off with Miwa talking a little bit about her work and taking us through some information about herself and her process. So Miwa, thank you so much. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. Thanks to Dreaming Green for having me be a part of this panel, and for Live Arts Miami. So I'm assuming that everyone in the class has seen the video clip, the full documentation video that's like 26 minutes that was passed on as part of this event, my virtual performance. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about my background as an artist and kind of give you context. I am based in Los Angeles. I studied animation, but through being in school, I started to combine theater performance with the animation. So the result of that is what you saw. There's projected animation from a front projector and a rear projector onto a screen. I'm behind the screen creating a shadow as a shadow silhouette and integrating myself live in with the images that I've created. So let me show a little, I'm gonna show like a little clip just as a reminder of what you probably saw. Oops. Oh wait, sorry, it's a bunch of windows. All right, I'm just gonna play a clip of this longer thing.
Two, one, two, one, two, three, one, two, one, two, three, one, two.
Oops. So I'm just gonna stop it there. Stop share and go to here. All right, so as you might have maybe interpreted, as an audience, this piece is about climate change, and it was very much inspired by my climate grief and climate anxiety over the last few years. Obviously, climate change has been an issue for decades, but I feel like in the last like 4, 5, 6 years or so, there's been a lot more media attention, and also I think the effects of climate change have felt more and more increasingly inescapable, like all across the country. For example, I'm based in California, so every year the wildfires feel more intense and more destructive. And knowing people who have lost their homes, knowing people who had to evacuate, and also, I live in the middle of the city, so I'm not near any mountains, but seeing how the atmosphere the air gets so bad every summer from the smoke all up and down the coast is, just feels like inescapable. And I'm sure that the folks on this call, on this Zoom event with us, based in Florida, are probably very much aware of the sea level rise and the pollutions in the oceans, and and the superstorms. So, so for this piece, I was kind of collecting a bunch of articles and headlines and podcast segments and images and stuff like that as part of the world building. So just kind of like casting a wide net of the kinds of ideas that I wanted to integrate into the work. And this, again, I think the collecting kind of had to do with my my climate anxiety as well, just kind of like cataloging all these kind of bad news, basically. And I was putting them, kind of cataloging them in an app called Evernote that's been very helpful for me to kind of like keep note of things and not forget, always kind of be able to search and reference back, as well as like collecting images. From there, I would draw sketches of some of the moments that were in the news art items, but then kind of create more kind of like artistic, kind of surreal renderings of what a symbolic visual of this piece of information might look like. For example, I think here I was thinking about like fish population collapse from overfishing, and that we're going to deplete the oceans. Or here I was thinking about, landfills and just how all this trash that we produce just gets taken somewhere and like dumped somewhere and then buried and forgotten, or we pretend to forget. So kind of like starting with sketches into starting to build the animation and the performance. And with my work and in this piece specifically, looking at some scientific information like statistics. So for example, I was pretty blown away and inspired, but kind of like in a horrified kind of way, with a statistic that Americans produce over 4.5 pounds of trash a day, kind of averaged out across the country. And when you think about what that means for how much trash we create per week, per month, per year, per lifetime, what that might mean, like, how that makes your body feel, to imagine that. And so this kind of concept, again, sort of like more of a statistical scientific concept, but how do I manifest that into a visual and sort of like a physical experience, the performance? Some of those kinds of ideas manifested in these kinds of scenes in the piece. This moment where I'm standing in the landfill and all this trash just comes pouring out of my body, and what that might feel like. Or the scene where I'm swimming or drowning in the ocean and can't break the surface to take a breath, and the ocean is full of plastics. It's just kind of like, floating all around me and keeping me submerged, as well as just the process of industry and manufacturing so much stuff that basically gets used once, if that, and then gets straight into the landfill, and like all the resources that are extracted to make this one thing that goes through our hand for like 5 seconds and then into the trash. So just kind of like the horror and again, my anxiety about this whole, how this world currently functions and many levels. And as part of making this, part of the process of making this piece, I was kind of having to confront my own trash. For example, the scene with like the trash pouring out and the trash under the waves. It was mostly my own trash, some from like the other apartments in my building, because I was kind of going through the blue bin out back. But I shot footage of them in these like loops so that I can animate them, you know, moving up and down with the waves, or animate them pouring out of my body, like kind of tumbling out. So to that end, like, because I was needing to confront and grapple with my own trash in order to shoot this footage, it also made me have to kind of look at the trash that I was producing. And I was doing like this audit kind of process for a few months last year, in the process of making the piece, where I would collect my plastic trash for the whole month instead of letting it go away in the blue bin every week and, you know, not think about it. So I would collect it and then lay it out and look at it so I can process through in my mind which things I can make different choices about. If I, you know, went to a store that had a bulk bin, or if I went more often to the farmer's market, and which items I didn't have a lot of choices for. If it's like, you know, frozen berries for my smoothies. I mean, I guess then I could get maybe fresh berries from the farmer's market and freeze it. But, you know, it's just like the process of figuring out where I can make changes and what that means in terms of effort and resources, if I have to drive really far to get something versus if you get something closer that's in plastic. So I think it was just the process of like kind of grappling and seeing where choices exist and choices don't exist. But I think it was sort of like an interesting exercise as an artist to kind of go through this process, as well as part of the art making. And also touching on the live performance aspect of my piece. So you saw a documentation video, but normally I travel and perform this piece live in a theater space. So when the audience comes into a theater, they see my screen and the projectors on stage, and they see me enter in and then turn into a shadow, and, you know, be a integrated part of these fantastical visuals. And as a shadow, what's interesting to me is that I could be a person, like I could be me, or I could be like a symbol of a person, but I can also be larger than life. Like you saw in that clip, and also here's like the two images where in one moment I'm inside of a car, stuck in traffic, you know, and gridlock. And I think this is an individual experience that everybody's very familiar with, of like being alone in the car in a road and traffic jam full of cars, full of just one person in the car, and knowing that we're just all spewing pollution into the air, and you know, just the horror of that feeling. But then the moment, a beat after, my shadow is in this oil field and I'm larger than a person, right? And I break into the ground, I reach down into the surface and I pull out oil and I start eating it. So it's almost like a symbolic or metaphorical version of gas guzzling, as opposed to this scene here, which, you know, is like, you know, using resources, gas guzzling, but kind of much more of our individual experience. So for me, performing with shadow is interesting because I could represent one person, like me or an individual, but then also the shadow could represent things like somehow the consciousness of humanity symbolically, or the earth itself, in this sequence where there's so like this circular ring around me that represents the earth and how quickly the surface of the earth is transformed with humanity. It goes from this kind of natural state into agriculture, into the Industrial Revolution, coal and oil mining, or, you know, extraction, into like the surface being filled with landfill, into later in this moment where all these things are true at once. There's both beauty and destruction, and creation and destruction. Um, so I think that's about kind of what I wanted to say as an intro to the piece. If we want to go to more of a panel discussion. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you so much for that. I want to start with a question from me from Live Arts Miami. I want to preface it by saying that Live Arts Miami presents artists from all over the globe in all kinds of disciplines. So music, theater, performance, art, dance. Did I say that already? Performing arts disciplines, multimedia. So it's really interesting that you in particular work in two mediums as an interdisciplinary artist. You work in animation and in performance. That's one thing that's very exciting to all of us about your work. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to use two distinct disciplines of art together to form one, and another kind of discipline being that of change and of activism, which another thing we're very interested in as Live Arts Miami is work that pushes change making forward. So can you speak about how, as an artist, you're able to affect change and to communicate the issue?
Mm-hmm. In terms of being an interdisciplinary artist, I mean, for me, like, animation is about creating these like surreal images, right? Things that don't exist in real life, and creating visual metaphors. So I think there's a lot of power in that with what I could create with animation, where I can create images from like nothing almost. And then live performance in theater is about creating an empathetical connection with the audience, because you are sharing space together. You're kind of in this space where you're breathing together, and the audience becomes like emotionally invested because there's a person in front of them. So for me, this integration of the two mediums is interesting, because I could create something that's both very surreal, dreamlike, and not of this world, with these visuals, but at the same time really ground it with a body, so it feels like a physical experience. It feels like hopefully with the audience participation, or not participation, audience perception and audience interpretation, when they see these images, it in some ways feels like they're happening to the body of the shadow figure, right, which they know is a live person. So I think there's kind of more of an investment emotionally and empathetically, because I could have made this whole thing as just the animation and not have the live component where I had like an animated black shadow. But I think you wouldn't have this kind of connection again, pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, where I could be in a theater space with them. I know that it's a little bit weird because we're talking about video that the students saw as opposed to a real performance right now. But yeah, so hopefully there's even more of an emotional connection when they see this work than if it had just been animation. And I think to that, in terms of like art and activism, I mean, for me, I made this piece kind of as my own kind of processing of, again, my climate grief, and how I felt like the world is, how intensely I felt like all the news items that I was seeing and feeling overwhelmed by them. So I feel like the piece is expressing that, and also is also an invitation for conversation, as well as invitation for people to see things that I think the systems of the world make invisible about, again, like, manufacturing of so much stuff, and that all this kind of basically goes straight into the landfill or into the oceans or wherever. So I wanted this piece to kind of help peel back those things and see things that we try to ignore, or the system makes us kind of blind to. And with this piece, to have these kinds of conversations, I'm really honored to be in a panel with activists, or scientists, or, also the general public, and kind of talk about how they feel their anxiety, or how where they live, like, kind of brings up certain aspects of climate change in the front of their mind. Again, like Florida, maybe sea level rise, and California, it tends to be wildfires because of our personal experiences with these, right?
Mhm.
So I was really interested in fostering these kinds of conversations around the piece as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. So it's really excellent to hear that as an artist, communicating the issue through the artwork, the images, putting it out there, triggering thought and triggering responses. And it's really exciting to hear that a really big part of this work is to trigger the conversations. And so are lucky to be surrounded by our panelists today who will ask some questions. I also want to say that there's a Q&A link box for any other questions from listeners that we're going to get to later. So if you do have any questions for Miwa, please feel free to put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A section of the screen, and we'll get to those questions as well. But I do want to start off by engaging our panelists into this conversation as well. So do we have any comments or questions right now from, excuse me, from our panelists? JP, go for it.
Yeah, it was super, this reminds me of a while ago, Gabby and I, who hosts a podcast, did an episode about the role of parents in the climate movement. And that seems to be a really niche subject that isn't explored too much. And you happen to explore the role of motherhood in your anxiety. Can you tell us a bit more about where that comes from and how you attribute your art to that?
Sure. I mean, well, role of motherhood is very new to me, because if you saw in the video footage, I was pregnant, and I think I shot that in July, and I had my baby like 2 months ago now. But I think in the time of making this work, which was like 2018, 2019, it was something I was really grappling with in terms of, I was wanting to and planning to, trying to have a child. But I think there's a grappling with one sort of the larger kind of, larger thing of oh, what is the world that we're leaving for the next generation? But then I think also personally as an individual, wanting to become a mother, of what is the world that my child will be living through, that they're inheriting, in terms of, my baby was born this year, so 2020, so she'll probably be alive through 2100 the year, which is really so far, it feels so far in the future and so abstract, but what will the world look like then? And I think there's a grappling with responsibility, as well as almost a sense of powerlessness, in terms of these larger systems that, even if we as individuals try to make these choices, there's places where we feel like we can't make a choice, or we can't make a change unless there's a larger systematic change. So I think that's where, activists come into, and policymakers, and making sure that they are in power, I think is important, because we as individuals, even if you're trying to reduce our consumption, reuse and recycle, to as much as we could, the systems that kind of lay out how cities are laid out, or transportation, all that, that's comes from a bigger capitalistic industry place where we don't feel like we have power. Anyway, so I think those are just kind of things that I was thinking about and chewing over as I was wanting to become a mother, and have become a mother in the process of making this piece and now showing it. So I don't have one clear answer, but I think it's, so much of art making is just kind of processing and then spitting out a bunch of things, for me at least.
Thanks. Did someone else have any questions about that? I mean, does anybody else have any other questions for Miwa? I think that you do. And also, JP, do you feel like, did you want to say more about that topic as well?
No, I'll give some space to Nick.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, to start off, thanks, Miwa. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and insight. And I have a question, but I also have a comment on the topic of parents. And I love that Jean-Paul and Miwa talked about it a little bit. But on the topic of parents, like growing up in a low-income family, I saw that like my parents would, repurpose items, like not for the mere purpose of, being eco-friendly, but just because they couldn't afford like to buy single-use items for every single need of their purpose. So whether it be bags, or repurposing anything in the house that they knew that they couldn't throw away, or if it was my mother who couldn't afford a car, so she was forced to ride public transportation. And then growing up and seeing that once I was in high school and then I was around these educators or leaders who could say that, this is how to live an eco-friendly life, and realizing, look, my parents were teaching me this the whole time, not out of want, but out of necessity. And so it's interesting to see that, and now there's this conversation where I guess sometimes I've seen that like it can be gatekept by like the intellectually elite, or saying like this is like how to like foster a lifestyle, and that it's praised. I was like, I've been doing that my whole life, and my parents have been teaching me that, and they were unconscious that they were unconscious, or I believe that they were unconscious that this was like something that's been advocated by a lot of people who are advocating for against like the climate crisis. But on the topic of also like collectiveness and talking about like people, I see, Miwa, that your work, it's very reflective, and in your work, like it's of self, and in the spaces I find myself in, it's very, the message is usually very collective, very, we can't do this by ourselves, we have to work with other people, right? So my question is, how does your individual work contribute to like that larger message of collectiveness, if you do believe it has any connection or attributes anything to it?
I feel like because I show my work in partnership with presenters, so often I do talk with presenters about ways I would like to have conversations, like not just come in and do a show and then leave, but then to hopefully build these kinds of conversations as well, and like reaching out the community into these conversations, or panelists, again, scientists, so that the conversation becomes a little bit bigger than just seeing the work. So yeah, when I was at Live Arts Miami, or last year it was called MDC Live Arts, it was like a week-long residency where, yes, I did the shows, but then we were also engaging with classes and talking about how, like we're doing workshops where I was inviting students to draw their own experiences of climate change and create images and kind of process through that as well and have conversations. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like art and activism is like a facet of larger activism. I think it's all like in conversation with each other. And I'm not sure if I would call my work necessarily activism. I feel like it's kind of more a manifestation of my own processing and want to have a larger conversation based on my own experiences and what I'm struggling with. But I would really love for this piece to be part of larger conversations about climate change, whether it be at like climate summits, where if there's a lot of speakers or a lot of like data and statistics to kind of help create like a visual experience of it through performance and the visuals, right? And I think so much of action comes from storytelling or a really powerful visual. I mean, there's also a message. There's also like yesterday for another panel, JP gave a really impassioned speech to a middle school class, and I found that so powerful, and I really appreciated it. But if speeches could be in conjunction with the visual images, in conjunction with things that make people's bodies move, in a collective action, I think those are all facets of things that help bring it all together and make it an experience that brings people to, to take in a concept and like, understand it fully and, kind of rise up into action, right? So I hope this work could be part of that kind of movement. Um, I don't believe that it is like by itself, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, JP. Julieta, do you have anything you wanted to comment or question related to the work?
Sure. I think this work is really impactful, and I'm so glad that we were able to see and be a part of that learning process with you. Have you considered tying in some actions or calls to action as a result of your work, so that after people see this video, either online or if you are able to go back in person, have you considered doing a collective action with the audience in order to drive climate policies forward?
I haven't necessarily. Like I said, I've done some workshops where at least it's sort of like engaging with people to imagine for themselves, to create these kind of symbolic images of their own ways that they intersect with climate change. So I've kind of done some more artistic actions in a very like smaller scale, but I would be interested, and I think it's something that helps if I'm with working with like climate activists to lead to like a larger action or an event that we go out to the world and do something. If anything, because I had the experience of the it's like very minor, but collecting my trash and like kind of auditing it to kind of assess my own choices, like that's something I would love to build in as like a conversation, or like something that I can call people in the audience to do. I think it's again like trying to bring light and pay attention to things that I think we're often not paying attention to. But yeah, I would say that I would love to be working with activists to kind of build more of these kinds of actions. And I'm not sure as an artist, I had really considered for myself to lead it by myself.
That's great. And that's kind of something that we've continued to talk about the art being the inspiration for the conversation or for the work, either the action or the work, and these great conversations with activists happening around the show. And then you mentioned you would love to speak at, show your work at summits. I mean, I think that there's something very inspirational about the very strong, powerful aspects of the work, the beauty of it, the deep emotional connection to it as a result of how strong it is as work, that in and of itself, it spurs action or could spur action. And I think it's really great for there to be a conversation with activists so that the activists at the table can say, yes, and here's what we're doing about it, join us. I think that it absolutely augments the work of the issues and the activism in that way. We have some questions from the audience. So I will go ahead and ask those questions now. The first question is from Jesse Caladonio. The question is, what editing software did you use? And somewhat unrelated, how do you feel about the future of editors and animators with iPhone apps already replacing hours of editing by real editors? I'm interested in animation and editing, but I feel anxiety for the future and how that won't be something as unique and would lose its artistic value. That's a really interesting question.
Sure. In terms of the software that I use, I'm using After Effects to make the animation. So kind of just like all up and down the Adobe suite. I'm often making the original images in Photoshop as like a collage, and then bring down to After Effects and creating movement. And then once I have like sections of animation, I'm often putting it together in Premiere. So those are 3 different Adobe software that I'm sure this person who asked the question knows about. Also, I wanted to point out that often the images that I have in the piece come from my real life. Again, I was talking about the garbage, but also even like the oil field came from when I was making the piece. I was like, I want to create a scene with the oil field, and then I realized that like 2 years before I made the scene, that I went on a road trip and came across an oil field in Bakersfield, California, and I had just like gotten out of my car. I was just kind of like being in like, look at this strange landscape full of, like these oil pump stuff. So I had shot a bunch of video and photos. So I kind of took that apart and rebuilt it into, this scene here. As well as like, using like video and parts of my house, and like the cows came from my husband's like family's farm in Virginia. So a lot of things I shot on iPhone, it was just like in my iPhone like photo history that I would dig back out and then work with to turn it into a scene of the piece. So it's another reason why I feel like this piece is like very personal, not just about like my climate anxiety and all this manifestation, but also using footage and items from my real life and surroundings, like the LA River here and stuff like that. And in terms of the future of animation, I'm not sure what to speak to about that. I mean, in terms of my own stuff, I think the animation software is still important, even if there's a lot that you could do in the iPhone, because I feel like I'm really building things from scratch in terms of, taking videos, taking photos, taking some found images and kind of reconstructing them into new images. And I feel like that depth of layering and world building, I don't think you could just do on an iPhone yet. Maybe you can later. But I do, like I said, I mix in a lot of things that I shoot from, even all this stuff I shot on my iPhone. I actually have a good camera, but I often end up just shooting on an iPhone because it often just works better and it's easier and it's lightweight and it's, it's easy to set up anywhere. So I'm excited about, new generations of artists having this resource just like in their pocket to, create stories very easily and have access to so much media with what they could shoot on their daily lives. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, because I don't really have like an answer, but I think it's exciting.
That's a great response. So another question from the audience is from Braden from McNichol Middle School, asking what inspired you to start in art?
What inspired me to start in art? I was actually a science major for the first 2 years in college, but I switched to art, and I think because I had always been interested, like I was always drawing, painting, making things. And later, after I've had an art practice for a while, I realized that the place that I was interested in the sciences was the same place I was interested in the arts, in terms of once I've developed a skill and technique that I really liked, which is, animation and performance. What I was trying to express was to kind of be in awe of the world and think about the micro and macro systems and how these invisible forces and invisible systems kind of tie ourselves together. In this piece, it's a little bit more kind of symbolic and metaphorical, but then I have another piece that's about the history of the earth that's like kind of very much a scientific timeline of like geological history, and kind of like zooming from like atoms into like the Big Bang and stuff like that. So there's a way that once I've developed my skills in art far enough that I feel like it's become my own technique, that I'm still trying to create pieces that create visual storytelling that's about being in awe of the world, or again, maybe in horror in this case. And those are the kinds of things I was interested in the science about being in awe of the world and how to understand the world in the micro and macro scales and systems and mechanics of how the world works. So yeah, this is, again, I kind of take very circuitous routes to answers, I think. But yeah, I would say that I was interested in art as a way to express my awe of the world and awe into the systems of how the world works.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question from a student in the audience about choosing the music. And if you could speak briefly about your personal links with the musicians, or what made you choose that, and do you think that music has enhanced what the music does to the work, to the animation?
Sure. So for Infinitely Yours, the music is all by my friend Morgan Sorn, Sorne, Morgan Sorn. And he's an LA-based artist that I became friends with in the last few years, I don't know, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, just part of the community here in Los Angeles. And he has like 8 or 9 albums on Spotify that you can find, or on his website. So I knew that I wanted this piece to be emotionally intense. There's a lot of moments of like horror and pain and like being terrified as the shadow, right? Like if I'm in some of these moments that I showed you. So like his music is like pretty intense. So I got permission from him to go through his discography, go through his albums, and like look through music to see which songs kind of resonated with the kinds of scenes that I wanted to create. So it was before I made the animation, but had some ideas and had some sketches. And then he let me go through his music, and then once I chose them, I could start building the animation to the timing of the music. So I'm really using the music as the backbone of the storytelling. And I was really building the animation to the music, the ideas and how I shaped them and with the music. So having access to music early in order to like inspire moments in the piece and inspire movements and gestures and intensity with the melody or the beat to the piece really helps. So I feel lucky that, living in the LA arts community, to have access to amazing musicians and also their music.
Yeah, that's pretty great to live in a big city surrounded by lots of other talent, and also as an artist to have lots of friends who are also making work in other mediums and disciplines. That's really great. And that's also what's really great about our community, Miami. We have a very robust community of makers here doing all kinds of things. And so since we've talked about that a little bit, and since we've talked about how really, really strong, powerful work can inspire action, I'd love to hear from our panelists, JP and Nick and Julieta, more about the way this generation, keeping in mind that most of the audience is middle school students, might be able to get involved and in the work you're doing. What is the work you do around action for these issues and for the environment, and how can they get involved, and maybe even a little bit of how you connected to it as a middle schooler yourself. We're going to take a few minutes for that. Let's start with Nick.
Jenny, actually, there was a question in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it's actually a pretty interesting question that I would like to see Niwa give a little bit of her insight to. Do you think we could possibly ask that question before we go into?
Sure.
Is if we could hear the response to this question first.
Okay.
And then if you want to message me what you mean, because there's only one question left in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to, if that's the one you mean. And then if you could respond to that, if everyone could respond to this issue, and then if there's time, we'll get back to that issue as well, if you could send it to me. So the question we're talking about is the action and your environmental work that you do as an activist. And
Perfect. Yeah. So I I am the vice president of the Youth for Environmental Sustainability Club at Miami-Dade College, the Wilson campus. And the club was pretty inactive last year when I was a freshman at the school. So now a team of my friends and I were trying to kind of get the conversation going on our campus on how our peers and even faculty can incorporate earth literacy into the classroom, but also just foster a conversation on environmental sustainability and what that looks like not only as an individual, but as a group, and what that looks like here in the US and globally, and just trying to foster an early discussion on it. And what we're hoping to do next semester is trying to engage students, and that's looked a little bit different now because of the pandemic, and how do we get students engaged in opportunities and also educational settings where they're learning about the climate crisis, about climate science, but also climate engagement. And that's looked a little bit difficult online, but we're getting through. But I think part of my work that I am especially I hold very dear to my heart. I am also a representative on the Writers Council for Transit Alliance Miami, which is a nonprofit here in Miami-Dade County, here in South Florida, that aims to better not only our public transportation, but our streets, make them more walkable, more bikeable. And I hold that very close to my heart because growing up, my mother relied on public transportation and I was on the bus all the time. And seeing how public transportation not only mitigates an environmental issue and a crisis that we have on car dependency across the United States, but also as a solution to inequities here in South Florida, how to provide access to low-income families in the working class. And so it's nice to see that that's like a multifaceted issue. So that's the work I do. And I'm very inspired, but like I mentioned in the past, like how I grew up not conscious of how these things were actually helping or were the topics of conversation on how do we build solutions against, to the climate crisis. But that inspired me to kind of embark, I guess you could say, on this journey of joining others in the climate crisis and learning more about it, and ultimately learning that it's not only individually me, but it's collective, and also that there's like these large, where we're talking about it, like the last session I was on, like there's these larger perpetrators that we have to hold accountable. And so that's the work I do, and just try to foster that discussion. But I'm always looking for new opportunities, not for myself, but also to share, for engagement, for collaboration, because I think collective work is extremely important. So.
Very important. Thank you. JP?
Sure. So I first got involved with climate advocacy and organizing through the Clio Institute. And I'll let Julieta talk a bit more about Gen Clio, but my journey really started there. When I reached out to Gen Clio, went to a couple meetings, and then began organizing with them. Through Gen Clio, I met a community of folks involved in climate activism, and I found out about the Sunrise Movement. And I went to one of their high school trainings in DC. And at the end of this 3-day-long training on political education and action planning and all of this great stuff, we planned an action ourselves. And I joined 150 kids from across the country who secretly walked into the Capitol, took their coats off, had all matching shirts, 3 giant banners from the second floor of the Capitol rolled down. We all got into formation. 20 of us got arrested as we were demanding climate action from our senators on President's Day. And in that moment, I felt a power that I'd never felt before. And it was a power that was inspiring, and one that diminished any form of anxiety or grief that I often felt, a feeling that we call militant optimism. And from that day, I just went full force into Sunrise, and I was able to start my own hub here in Miami, which I'm now the hub coordinator of. But furthermore, I found a role in Sunrise Movement. I was bringing the voice of someone who is from a frontline community, who is able to experience the direct impacts of a changing climate. And I am now acting as both a spokesperson, and I'm working with a group of 12 folks who are spending a year-long process, which is why I decided to take this gap year, asking themselves, what kind of movement is needed right now to meet the scope and scale of the moment? And it's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility, but totally worth it. And here in Miami, we are in the midst of rolling out a campaign in which we're building a coalition of folks who are aligned with our principles to create a Green New Dade, where we want to offer a more just and equitable Miami-Dade that protects people and the lands in which they live above corporate developers and polluters. And we're ushering a new age in Miami by young people, and we're really excited to do that. And if you want to get involved, go on sunrisemovement.org and search up our hub in the little map that there is on the website.
Cool. Thank you, JP. Julieta.
Hey everyone. So I'm part of the Clio Institute, and one of our main programs in the Clio Institute is our youth program. And it's called Gen Clio, which is short for Generation Clio. And it encompasses middle school, high school, and university students as we work together to push forward climate action and policy in our community in Miami-Dade County, as well as the entire state of Florida and beyond. So we have different activities for Gen Clio. The one coming up, we're actually having a virtual climate art party. So if you're interested, it's going to be on December 21st. I'll put in the link in the chat. And there you can meet some other students that are interested in climate policy. We're going to be all making art pieces to contribute to a larger collage that's going to drive forth climate literacy and action throughout the state. So we're excited for that. We also welcome you to the entire Gen Clio movement at large. I'm going to send the second link, and that is a form where you can sign up to receive updates. We send the newsletter out once a month. I'll send the newsletter probably in the next 10 days or so with a recap of everything we've done this year, as well as what our goals are for the year ahead. So we would love to have you in. Bring your friends, invite your teachers if you'd like as well. And really the message I want to drive home is that your voice matters. So one of the most important things that you can do for climate action, even if you're not old enough to vote, is to start that climate conversation. So whatever you learned in this panel today, or whatever interests you about the climate, share that conversation with somebody. Whether it's a family member at home, if it's a neighbor, if it's somebody at the grocery store, wherever you go, share that climate message, because the more we start talking about it and normalizing climate action, the more success we can have driving it forward. It was a pleasure to meet you all. Please stay tuned for more Clio updates and stay involved.
Great, thank you so much. We actually do have like 3 minutes for the last question that was in the Q&A. So if Miwa, if you can respond to it, that would be really great. The question is a really great question that I think a lot of people are very interested in here. And the question is about the imagery and messages of motherhood in your work and that of creation. Was there a draw to ecofeminism? And if so, how did you interpret or think of that lens?
I wasn't necessarily thinking directly through an ecofeminist lens. I think on one level, there is also just being an artist and representing women artists, women director, women creator, a woman working in technology, like art, digital art making. So, and also because when I create my work, it feels like a very personal process, because I integrate so much of my personal life into it that I want to be a part of the work. Like I don't want someone else to be in it. And I want the piece to feel, very much my own and like completed by me being inside of it. So I think in some ways, like there was no way that it was not going to be me. And have like a man in it or something like that. But at the same time, I do think about like the feminine energy of creation. And again, when I was making the piece, I was, in the process of thinking about like wanting and planning for a child, and in the process of showing the work, being pregnant and having a child. So I think it's sort of like woven into the fabric of the piece, but I mean, yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking directly about ecofeminism, so I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, that not thinking about it is also a response. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists, our guest artist Miwa Matreyek. I want to introduce Alex Ender from Dreaming Green, who's the organization that's responsible for all of us being here today and for this really important conversation around environmental and climate issues that happens in your school. So thank you, and thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Live Arts Miami and Cleo, and to all of our awesome panelists, and of course to Miwa for, again, sharing her piece and also her time with us today. Thank you to all of our students and teachers that joined us as well, and for your questions. I think that this was a really great discussion. So that we hope that you take what you learned here today to move ahead and create your own climate stories. And through whichever medium you choose to create those stories, that you share them with your fellow students, teachers, and even at home with your families. I'm going to drop in the chat the link to the lesson plan that aligns with this workshop and the Green Schools Challenge. And so also we'll be offering other workshop series in the beginning of next year with another artist. So we hope that you'll be joining us for those as well. And so thank you everyone again for coming today. And thank you again to everybody that was on this call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.